The applause was thunderous. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of wealthy guests as my father lifted a champagne glass and proudly declared that my sister, Miranda, would inherit everything our family had built. In that moment, I wasn't simply forgotten, I was erased. Then, just as the celebration reached its peak, an unfamiliar silver-haired man walked straight toward my table carrying a sealed envelope. Within minutes, everything my parents had spent 2 decades hiding was about to unravel. My name is Dulce Witford. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my life my family called me the slow one. My older sister, Miranda, was the shining star of the Witford family. She collected awards, prestigious degrees, and endless praise. I collected awkward smiles, lowered expectations, and reminders that I would never measure up. The Whitfords weren't just wealthy, they were Manhattan royalty. Our surname appeared on hospitals, museums, and scholarship plaques. My father, Gerald Whitford, proudly ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate company worth more than $92 million. Everyone believed he had built that empire. The truth was different. It had been my grandmother, Eleanor Whitford, who started everything decades earlier with one tiny office in Brooklyn. She created the company from nothing. My father simply inherited what she had spent her entire life building. When I was 7 years old, doctors diagnosed me with dyslexia. Words never stayed still on a page. Letters twisted, swapped places, and blurred together until reading became exhausting. While other children finished books in an afternoon, I fought through a few pages. Instead of encouraging me, my parents quietly accepted a cruel conclusion. Dulce just isn't academic, my mother, Priscilla, would tell relatives. At 12 years old, Miranda received violin lessons, private SAT tutors, and expensive language programs. Every dollar was considered an investment in her future. When I asked whether I could have specialized reading support, my mother sighed as though I'd asked for something unreasonable. "We've already spent enough trying to help you," she said. "Some children simply have limits." I believed her. So I stopped asking. Instead, I created my own way of learning. Audiobooks became my teachers. I filled notebooks with diagrams instead of paragraphs. Pictures made sense when words refused to cooperate. Every Sunday I visited Grandma Eleanor on the Upper West Side. She never rushed me. Instead of handing me textbooks, she'd explain business, history, and life through stories. One afternoon she gently covered my hand with hers. "Dulce," she whispered, "you don't see less than other people." I looked up. "You see differently." I frowned. She smiled warmly. "People who rush often miss what matters. You notice patterns everyone else overlooks. Never confuse being different with being broken." Those words stayed with me long after I left her apartment. I didn't realize then that Grandma saw something in me nobody else did. Or that she was quietly preparing for a future none of us could imagine. A few years later, during our annual Christmas gathering, 20 relatives filled my parents' elegant dining room. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the lights while everyone waited for my father's yearly speech. He proudly announced Miranda's acceptance into Harvard Law. The room exploded with applause. Then his eyes landed on me. "And Dulce?" He paused just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "Well, she's here too." Laughter drifted around the table. Not loud. Not cruel enough for anyone to object. Just enough to remind me exactly where I belonged. I lowered my eyes toward my untouched dinner, pretending I couldn't hear it. Then, beneath the table, someone quietly squeezed my hand. Grandma Eleanor. When I looked across the table, her expression wasn't embarrassed. It was furious, and in that silent moment, she made a decision that would one day change the fate of the entire Whitford empire. Christmas dinner ended, but the laughter stayed with me long after the guests had gone home. I stood alone on the townhouse balcony, watching snow drift across the Upper East Side while muffled voices echoed through the windows behind me. Everyone inside celebrated Miranda's future as if it belonged to the whole family. No one wondered where mine was heading. A few minutes later, the balcony door slid open. Grandma Eleanor stepped outside, wrapping her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It's colder than it looks," she said softly. "So is this family," I replied before I could stop myself. She didn't correct me. Instead, she rested beside me, looking over the city lights. "They don't understand you. They don't even try." I know. Those two words almost broke me. For years I'd wondered if anyone noticed what happened inside that house. Grandma had. She always had. After a long silence, she turned toward me. "Dulce, promise me something." "What?" "No matter how many people tell you what you can't become, never let them decide who you are." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. She smiled sadly. "One day, you'll understand why I keep saying that." At the time, I thought she was simply trying to comfort me. I had no idea she was already planning far beyond that snowy night. A few months later, Grandma invited me to her apartment on the Upper West Side. The familiar scent of tea and old books welcomed me inside. Her apartment felt different from my parents' mansion. There were no expensive displays meant to impress visitors. Everything had history. Family photographs. Old architectural drawings. Framed newspaper articles about the early years of Whitford properties. As always, she asked about my week before talking about business. Then she unfolded several old contracts across the dining table. "Today," she said, "I'm going to teach you something your father never learned." I looked at the legal documents and laughed nervously. "Grandma, I struggle just reading regular pages." She smiled. "Exactly why you'll learn differently." Instead of asking me to read line after line, she pointed to arrows, signatures, dates, and ownership charts. "Forget the words for a moment," she said. "Look at the structure." Slowly, the confusion disappeared. I could actually see how every page connected to the next. The contracts looked less like paragraphs and more like blueprints. My grandmother watched my face brighten. "There it is." "What?" "The way your mind works." She tapped the documents. Most lawyers read sentence by sentence. Her finger moved across the papers. "But you." She smiled proudly. "You see systems." For hours we studied together. For the first time in my life, learning didn't feel impossible. It felt natural. Before I left, Grandma disappeared into her bedroom and returned carrying a small mahogany box with polished brass hinges. She placed it carefully into my hands. "Keep this somewhere safe." I examined it curiously. "What's inside?" "Not yet." I laughed. "Seriously?" She nodded. "One day you'll know exactly when it's time to open it." I wanted to ask another dozen questions. Instead, she gently closed my fingers around the box. "Trust me." Something in her voice stopped me from arguing. When I walked home that evening, I couldn't stop wondering what could possibly be important enough to stay hidden. The answer wouldn't come for years. Life moved forward. I graduated from a state university in 2022. It wasn't an Ivy League diploma. Around my family, that fact alone made me feel like an apology. Still, I wanted one chance. Just one. I applied for a job at Whitford Properties. I wasn't asking to become an executive. I simply wanted the opportunity to prove that I belonged somewhere inside the company my grandmother had built. My father agreed. Sort of. He hired me as an administrative assistant. Annual salary: $42,000. The same week, Miranda joined the company. Her title was Chief Legal Counsel. Her starting salary exceeded $280,000, plus bonuses and benefits. No one even pretended the difference was based on fairness. My desk sat outside conference rooms I was never invited into. I copied contracts, scheduled meetings, delivered coffee. Sometimes executives passed me in the hallway without realizing I was Gerald Whitford's daughter. Oddly enough, that became my greatest advantage. While everyone ignored me, they spoke freely. Executives discussed mergers near the elevators. Lawyers debated negotiations outside meeting rooms. Accountants complained about numbers while waiting for coffee. I listened. I observed. Then I went back to my desk and sketched diagrams showing how every conversation connected. Without realizing it, I was developing exactly the skill Grandma Eleanor had seen years before. I didn't just remember information. I recognized patterns hidden inside it. And those patterns were about to expose secrets powerful people believed would stay buried forever. Every evening after work, I'd return to my tiny apartment in Queens exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. While everyone else saw me as the quiet assistant who made copies and booked meeting rooms, I was slowly connecting pieces no one else even noticed. Every conversation, every document, every small inconsistency fit together like parts of a puzzle. Sometimes I caught myself wondering, was Grandma Eleanor right all along? Maybe I wasn't slow. Maybe I had simply been looking at the world through a different lens. One Sunday, I stood in front of Grandma Eleanor's portrait and whispered, "I wish you were here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." The room stayed silent. But somehow, I felt as if she had already left me the answer. Back at the office, my father continued treating me like I was invisible. Miranda walked through the halls surrounded by executives, while I quietly carried files from one floor to another. They believed I wasn't paying attention. That was their biggest mistake. Because the people who are ignored often notice everything. And soon, something was about to happen that would force my entire family to look at me for the very first time. The next evening, the Plaza Hotel glittered with wealth and celebration. More than 300 guests filled the grand ballroom, applauding as my father proudly praised Miranda's achievements. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead while cameras flashed from every direction. I sat alone at a table near the back of the room. Far from the stage. Far from my family. Exactly where they wanted me. When my father announced that Miranda would inherit his estate and eventually become CEO of Witford Properties, the room erupted into another standing ovation. No one looked in my direction. No one wondered what would happen to me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to smile. Then everything changed. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a silver-haired man walking directly toward my table. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He stopped in front of me. "Miss Dulce Witford?" I nodded cautiously. "My name is Jonathan Ellis," he said, handing me an embossed business card. "I served as your grandmother Eleanor's attorney." My heart skipped. Before I could ask another question, he carefully removed a sealed cream-colored envelope from inside his jacket. "Your grandmother instructed me to deliver this to you only after your father publicly showed the world exactly how he truly viewed you." I stared at the envelope. The red wax seal was untouched. My hands trembled as I accepted it. "What is this?" I whispered. Jonathan looked at me with calm certainty. "The truth your grandmother spent years protecting." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me frozen in place while laughter and applause echoed through the ballroom. I looked down at the envelope resting in my hands. Somehow, I knew my life was about to change forever. The music inside the ballroom continued, but I couldn't hear it anymore. Clutching the sealed envelope against my chest, I slipped through the service hallway until the cheers faded into silence. My heart pounded so loudly it felt as if the entire hotel could hear it. With trembling fingers, I broke the wax seal. Inside was a notarized legal document. At first, the words blurred together, something that had happened my entire life whenever stress overwhelmed me. I took a deep breath, slowed down, and read each line carefully, exactly the way Grandma Eleanor had taught me. Then one sentence stopped me cold. Grandma had left me 51% of Witford Properties. Not a small inheritance. Not a gift. The controlling ownership of the entire company. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. Then came another paragraph. Grandma had written that I wasn't slow. I had been denied opportunities, underestimated, and abandoned by the very people who should have believed in me. She knew exactly how my parents had treated me, and she refused to let that injustice continue after she was gone. Tears rolled down my face. Not because of the money. Because someone had truly seen me. Every lonely Christmas. Every cruel joke. Every moment I questioned my own worth. Grandma had noticed it all. She believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. But the will carried one final condition. I had only 72 hours to call an emergency board meeting. If I failed to act before the deadline, everything would disappear forever. I looked through the ballroom doors. My father and Miranda were still smiling for photographs, completely unaware that the future they had celebrated only minutes earlier was already slipping away. For the first time in 20 years. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide my value. I finally understood what Grandma had been preparing me for. Justice. Not revenge. Justice. 3 days later, I walked into the Whitford Properties boardroom carrying nothing except the truth, Grandma's final gift, and the courage she'd spent years helping me build. By the end of that meeting, the people who had laughed at me could no longer look me in the eyes. The daughter they called the slow one had become the majority shareholder of the empire they thought they controlled. And my father finally realized something he should have learned decades earlier. Never underestimate the quiet person in the room. Sometimes they're the only one who truly understands how everything fits together. Today, when I look back, I don't think about the fortune. I think about Grandma Eleanor's words. Being different doesn't make you less. It simply means you see what others cannot. Those words became the greatest inheritance she ever gave me. And maybe they're meant for someone watching this right now. If you've ever felt ignored. If you've ever been told you weren't smart enough, talented enough, or good enough. Don't let someone else's opinion become your identity. Your story isn't over yet. The people who overlook you today may one day witness the very success they insisted was impossible. And before you go, I have one small question. Have you subscribed yet? If this story touched your heart, don't just watch silently. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment sharing the biggest challenge you've ever overcome. I read your comments, and many of your stories inspire future videos. Thank you for spending your time with me until the very end. Until our next story. Take care of yourself, believe in your own worth, and never stop proving to yourself, not to anyone else, that you are capable of extraordinary things.